There's a freeze warning in the state of Florida, and no, it is not winter weather. That's right. It's Scott Frost heading back to UCF in what seems like a redemption for this guy. We talked about Rich Rodriguez just a minute ago going to West Virginia. Now we're going to talk about another guy trying to revitalize his career. When you think about the redemption story for Scott Frost, his downfall in Nebraska, his success at UCF, and what he learned in his time away from head coaching, obviously spent a lot of time off the field and on the field, relearning, regrouping. Now he gets a chance to prove himself again in what seems to be a very respectable program in the Big 12 and UCF, a program that we've seen success in recent years, even under Scott Frost. Mm-hmm. So, Brad, let's jump into the redemption story. Obviously, being a hometown kid from Lincoln, Nebraska, growing up in Nebraska, being the quarterback in Nebraska, this seemed like a fairy tale in the making. And boy, did it turn out to be an absolute nightmare. Yeah. You hate it for a guy like him. You know he has so much love and respect for Nebraska, their fan base. And I almost just think it was too much pressure. I think up front there was too many people thinking that he had already won a national title before he had already won one. Thoughts on Scott Frost heading back to UCF, and can he get his redemption?
You brought up some great points. Would love to hear from the Nebraska fans in our comments, about this, and feel how you want to feel about Scott Frost. I will say, I think, your current head coach, Matt Rhule, is doing a good job. I know we're both a big fan, but that's a subject for a different day. Look, Nate, for me, a couple things with Scott Frost. I want to first off say I'm a huge Scott Frost fan. I remember watching his offensives at Oregon. I was like, man, this guy's going to be unbelievable.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of Will Stein.
That's a great comparison. I think it's, to me, really two factors. You mentioned the pressure. I think that's a big part of it. One, let's be honest. The conference that he went to in Nebraska in the Big Ten is much tougher competition than what he faced at UCF. That is not taken away. Scott Frost, to me, is a tremendous head football coach. I mean, he's a tremendous offensive mind. That's just reality is you're playing in a tougher conference. You had Ohio State, you have Michigan, you had the usual big programs there in the Big Ten. The second one, and this is not a slight against Nebraska, I think it was honestly a little bit easier to recruit at UCF.
Probably.
Now, I want to, and I'm sure there's going to be some people watching this saying Brad, you're an idiot, and I'm here for the comments. I want to preface this one, say that what I mean by that is, Nate, you could draw an hour perimeter around Orlando, where UCF's campus is, and pretty much build 90% of your roster. Nebraska, yes, there's more resources. It's a bigger fan base. There's more money. It's a little bit tougher to find some of those players.
Hidden gems.
And like I said, that is not a slight against Nebraska, but when you do not really have to leave the state of Florida, or you may touch Alabama, you may touch South Georgia, and I will say, Florida, I think you've got Florida, you've got California, Texas, and Georgia is kind of the big four recruiting spots. You could just get some elite hidden gems in the state of Florida. I really think that played a big part of it. You think about Mackenzie Milton, who was his quarterback there, really was a big part of his offense. And so that, to me, plays a part in it. I'm excited for this. I'm actually, my family and I were traveling down to UCF. We're traveling down to Orlando, this week for a little vacation. I'm going to a UCF basketball game. I'm interested to talk to some of the fans and potentially alumni there. I'm going for a basketball game with my father-in-law. I'm going to try to talk to some locals there about what their thoughts are about with Scott hire. I can tell you, watching some videos, reading some articles, there's an excitement there. Gus Malzahn, it was a very mixed bag, but Nate, and before I turn it back over to you, mentioned this. What has he learned since he's been out of Nebraska? And I will say, I think sometimes when you get fired at a big place like that with expectations, it's good to take a year off. And what he do, he went to the Rams as an analyst. Sean McVay is an unbelievable NFL head coach. I think we're going to see some new things on offense. I think he's refreshed, he's motivated, he's excited. My final point, Nate, before turning it back over to you, he is in a tougher conference going to the Big 12, but I'm telling you, UCF is they're waiting in the they're waiting in the weeds. They're waiting in the tall grass. I think they could be a giant in the Big 12. In the state of Florida, the Big 12 is wide open. With Scott Frost, I think rejuvenated. I like this hire.
Yeah, it's going to be intriguing to see what Scott Frost can bring to this program. I've seen personally some of the videos of these athletic facilities down at UCF, and it's crazy.
Tremendous, absolutely.
You're talking lazy rivers. I mean, everything, the whole shebang. He's got the resources down there. And to your point, I've been to Nebraska. I've been up there. It's a beautiful state, beautiful stadium. Love it up there. It's just a very simple way of life. But you're right. I mean, you draw a 50-mile radius around Nebraska Stadium. Maybe you can pick a couple players from the Dakotas, from Iowa, from Nebraska. There's a couple of hidden gems there. But if you go in with such high expectations, it's really easy to have a tremendous downfall very fast. And it's unfortunate because, like I said, I know Scott Frost has a lot of love for Nebraska, and I think he did as best as he could have. Now, fans will disagree with that, but I think with the pressure, maybe he got a little bit too comfortable. I don't know. Nonetheless, didn't work out. To your point, take some time off, goes back to his humble roots, gets some more offensive insight from a guy like Sean McVay, and now he's ready. He's ready to go coach down at UCF, and I think it's a great fit. I think the two concerns are, we kind of touched on it, is can he handle the pressure after leaving Nebraska? I think he can. And will he adjust to the philosophy to today's college football? I want to get your thoughts real quick on that.
I absolutely think he can. I mean, you look, his final year at Nebraska was 22. And so he was already having to, navigate NIL. He was having to navigate transfer portal. Like I said, he's in a hotbed. I mean, I would love to hear some UCF, insight here from our listeners in the comments. I'd love to hear the NIL game. I'm just not real familiar with UCF's NIL, dealings. But Nate, as far as transfer portal, look, he's in a hotbed for Florida, so you take, transfers from Miami, from Florida State, from UF. UCF is an attractive destination. You take SEC and ACC transfers. I think Scott Frost is going to be just fine. I think the biggest thing to me is in today's college football, look, you've got to get a quarterback in there. You've got to get, and I think just as important is wide receivers. If Scott Frost is able to convince some of those unbelievable Florida wide receivers to stay at home, like I said, UCF is potentially a giant program in the making, potentially a team that I wouldn't say dominates the Big 12. I think we're going to see the Big 12 always kind of be wide open, but UCF can be one of those that are just always at the top potentially.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point that popped up in my head, and that's Scott Frost's offense. And we talk about his philosophy, and we talk about how he's motivated to prove himself. I don't think his offense from UCF translated to the Big Ten Conference.
That's a fair point.
I think that, along with the pressure, but the biggest thing for me was it just didn't translate. And now he's got a chance to go back and show off his high-flying offense. You try to bring that into a program that's been recruiting for years, big, heavy-set guys who know how to move the line of scrimmage, but that's about it. They can't really move around. And then you add the recruiting element to it. It was just a recipe for a disaster. I think behind the scenes, I had good intentions, but it just was not the right fit.
Nate, and I think that's a very underrated point. And look, I'm not saying, we're not saying that, some of these high tempo, high powered offenses cannot work in the Big Ten, but you look at, Ohio State, they're running a lot of 11 personnel with three wide receivers and, a running back, but it's still a power running game. The tight end's still involved. I think a prime example of this, and you made a really good point. Look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin for years has been a downhill running team, and they go out and they hire Luke Fickell, who brings in Phil Longo to run an air raid offense, and it simply didn't work. And so, and now of course we're not going to get in that, but Luke Fickell has now gone and hired a little bit more of a traditional spread guy. So
we'll talk about coordinators in the next episode.
Absolutely, but I think that's a fair point, is that sometimes you can be successful with a system at one place where the roster fits, has your fits. And hey, that may be a little slight against Scott Frost that he should have adapted. But, I think that's a very, very fair and honest point about his offense.
Yeah, and I think the best example is Georgia Tech.
Absolutely.
Transitioning from triple option to spread.
Yeah.
It was bound to fail. And it did.
It took years, and they went through a head coach, and now they're having success with it. But it took a few years to work out those kinks and everything.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued to see what Scott Frost can do with UCF, and you'll get some really good insight this weekend.
Yeah.
When you head down to Orlando, we'll get back to you on that, what Brad finds out. But yeah, if you're a UCF fan, let us know down in the comments what you think about this rejuvenation, this redemption year for Scott Frost, for the UCF Knights, the Golden Knights.
UCF Knights. Yeah.
Knights. I always get it mixed
Maybe
up.
the Golden Knights.
Vegas is the Golden Knights in hockey, so my apologies. He is a Golden Knight. Don't know the official mascot, but
it's just the Knights. Yeah, I just had to
UCF Knights, nonetheless. We want to hear from you. We want to hear in the comments what you think about Scott Frost, and do you think y'all have a chance to win the Big 12 under his leadership? Be sure to like, subscribe down below, and let us know down in the comments what you're thinking about Scott Frost. We'll see you next week. It's time to break the huddle.